Welcome back to the Pulse Podcast and part 2 of our conversation about code development. If you listened to the first part, you learned a lot about the process, how to get involved, and how to propose code changes. And speaking of code changes, today we're going to hear awesome stories from some of the key people who have made the codes what they are today. My first guest is Michael O'Brien, and when it comes to the world of code development, he's pretty much done it all. Michael, welcome to the show. And I want to start by talking a bit about your career and how you got started in the industry. And then I want to know how long you've been involved in the code development process.
I was a young firefighter and I had done construction in my off days and growing up as a young man. And so the community I was a firefighter in was going through a building boom, and they found out I could read drawings. And so they said, "Hey, the fire marshal quit. You want to be fire marshal?" And I don't know, my starting salary was somewhere around 15,000 a year. And when they offered me an 8% raise to do fire inspection stuff, I jumped at it. Back then, we were on this book called Boca,
Yeah.
1996, and then we had a row of books that said NFPA on them, and they wanted me to go do a puff test, and I never knew what a puff test was, so typical firefighters, they just pointed at the books and said, "It's in there." And that was my first experience doing inspections, and I think from that day forward, I've had the ability to be mentored by quite a few people, and it started an early passion for me to how do we take codes and standards, get safe buildings, and create better work environments for firefighters and people working in them. And so, probably about 2003, I had a boss who said, "Hey, if you want to influence change, you got to show up." And this is when the ICC was doing quite a bit of work about trying to get the fire service involved in codes and standards. And so I drove down to a code hearing in Columbus. This is back when there were big phone books and you had to get the right phone book to see the code change.
Wow.
And I don't even think there were many computers, that the first code hearing I went to. And I really didn't understand the flow. And it took me a couple days to try to figure it out. I actually took vacation days to go. And luckily, I bumped into enough people who kind of helped take me under their wing and allowed me to kind of flourish over time. And so, if you probably fast forward to current, not only am I the fire chief here in Brighton, but I own a consulting company that we solve a lot of complex issues for a lot of people, communities all across the US. And so I've been blessed in code development where I've had the chance to work on behalf of the IFC, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and be involved in the Fire Code Action Committee. And I chaired that for almost 9 years. And that was a really great labor of love to handle some pretty tough problems that came up code wise. Definitely taught that you got to get the right people in the room if you're talking codes and standards. And so it's been a lot of fun for the last, 25 years,
Yeah.
working in codes and standards. I love the people, I love the challenge, and you really hope that you're making a difference out in the built environment for sure.
Absolutely. Back up a little bit. You said puff test. So for us ignorant folks out here, what's a puff test?
Yeah, that's a good question. Puff test is one of those things that we have our own verbiage in codes and standards. And puff test is nowhere to be found in any codes and standard. It's when they put in a new wet chem fire suppression system. There was early, they called it a puff test, in which they would put balloons where the nozzles were, and it was a way to check that the piping was connected, and the balloons would blow up. They would put compressed air through the piping that serves over a canopy, kitchen hood, fire suppression system. There was a little stint where a lot of them went to what was called a wet test, where we would actually discharge agent
Yeah.
through the piping, and you would find a lot of leaks in like elbows and corners. And now the manufacturers are really shying away from those. But yeah, puff tests. It taught me that not every word we refer to is in our codes and standards when you
Sure.
got to go do an inspection.
Yeah. Like you said, 25 years ish in the industry. So it's a pleasure to talk with you. Just me personally, I'm gearing up in early April to take my CFM exam. And I'm excited about that. I'm a little nervous about that. So getting to talk to you fire guys and even learning some of the unofficial stuff like puff test, it's helpful. So you've been in the code industry for quite a while. I'm sure you've had both success and failure when it comes to code hearings. Tell me about some of the success stories that you've had seeing code change.
The Fire Code Action Committee was, I would call that a labor of love when you look at code changes. And I got to chair that too, even during the COVID code changes, which some people really loved and some people really hated. And so, I think about the successes, and there's a whole bunch of topics. We might have rearranged chapters. We worked on the A2L refrigerant, which was a mechanical building code item, residential sprinklers, changes to gas detection, emergency alarm systems. There's been the tall mass timber and all of those changes. I think for me, sometimes the stuff I love the most is when somebody has a different viewpoint and they identify something and they're reading the codes maybe the way we don't read the codes. And so seeking to understand. And one of the things that I probably have been trying to work on for quite some time is it's just a very simple change that we experience in the fire side. It's really in everybody, but it was the sprinkler system water flow monitoring. And I tried for a couple of years, couple cycles to get this fixed. And what it is you have this clash of our standards versus what's really happening in the field in our codes. And in this case, every sprinkler system is supposed to be monitored by a fire alarm system. So we monitor a flow switch, and typically in the old NFPA 13 land, it would put an outside water gong. Well, most people aren't putting water gongs. And so it led to these powered outside horn strobe devices. Well, nobody knew how to maintain those. So after about 20 years, you would need an electrician to come out and test these 110-volt horn strobes. And it just didn't make sense to me. We have this beautiful fire alarm system. Why wouldn't we just power it from the fire alarm system? And then the fire alarm people who are really good at that stuff would maintain it, and we would reduce the cost for our building owners and everything. And so if you look at something just as simple as that, it was getting the conversation going, which led to help to getting it fixed. And so submitting code changes, working codes and processes, I think sometimes you have to find your friends and you have to find those who are just against it and really try to work the problem. And that's in the success side. Man, there's been some really cool wins, but some of them aren't that glamorous. It's just making better codes. Like
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer we need very high, easy usability of codes and standards. And so working towards those, look at the very simple change of just trying to get scoping and general statements of sections right. I know it sounds very minute, but if you looked, we were very inconsistent in all of our
Yeah.
codes about what a section's about. Some had laundry lists, some had run on sentences, some had no sentences. And so just trying to get that from a usability, I think a lot of our code officials, both building and fire, I'm probably one of those weird fire guys that does building as well as fire. And I think I've seen just too many code officials not know how to navigate a code. And so I think of just some of those very simple things of how do we just make this document very usable for whoever's using it.
And even as you have these dialogues with people who might, like you said, see the code different than you, I'm sure that continuously there's new, oh, I didn't think about that. We need to address that and see how we can make it more black and white. I mean, how many gray instances have you come across and had a light bulb moment of, "But there we go, there's another one we need to address."
I mean, there's some tough issues in our codes that probably still need some updates, but I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody's brave enough to work on them anymore.
What are some examples of that?
Height and area tables. So if you take height and area tables, you definitely have to go back and look at how we got to them. And we've seen some small changes in how the tables are utilized in the building code. Time and time again, you're looking for changes within there for the allowable size of a building, the allowable heights of buildings, and construction classifications, and what's right and what's wrong. But there's been a lot of attempts over the years to make changes in those height and area tables. I do think we saw some really great work from the Fire Code Action Committee and some dedicated members here recently in trying to get our codes aligned with GHS. So changing how we refer to SDS sheets and getting the verbiage to be complacent with changes that are happening outside the code industry. Like that one has been a pretty big lift and they made a lot of progress in this 2027 code cycle. So I think there's a lot of them that are happening, but I don't know. Someday somebody's going to want to rearrange the IBC and they'll come forward with a really good proposal because they want the flow different. And it'll be a hard one to discuss.
It's interesting you brought up the height and area table because I was talking to John Terry about this, and he said, if you're a new guy, I definitely don't recommend starting with a height and area table. And I think you hit the nail on the head of why. I mean, you got to really bring the data on that. That's such a robust topic. Do you think that's in the future, though? Is that something that people are looking at? Have you heard in your circles of that's something that we want to tweak?
I think you're going to always see these requests come in, and they may be singularly focused, but it is such a hard topic. I think somewhere somebody's going to work to make sure we got it right. I'm not saying we got it wrong, but there's definitely a desire to see some tweaks over the years.
Industry wise, largely there's code officials, architects, engineers, so many folks gathered in that spirit, what you just said, thinking about tomorrow. Who do you think's most underrepresented? Who do you think, if we were to put a finger on something that really needs a larger seat at the table?
Middle America code officials. I think our large city code officials, state code officials are expected to be at the ICC. They are always well represented because they have people who are dedicated to codes and standards. And so, where I really go in middle America, it's those code officials, both building and fire, who are small shops. For them to disappear into code development land for a week and a half, they may not have the robust backup within their community. But I'm going to tell you, their voices have to be heard, and we've got to help them. So when I look at what some of the building boom that is happening in some of these small communities, they do not have that robust support for technical code application or best practices, but they bring a very valuable view to our built environment. And some of them are just incredible code officials, right? Think of some of our states and metros, you can specialize. I just do multifamily res. I just do high rise. And not that some of our small part-time building departments and fire departments would have high rise, but they're going to do everything. They're going to be doing the residential plan review. They might be looking at ESS. And then, oh, wait, hey, Mr. Code Official, we're proposing a 500,000 square foot server building in your cornfield. And so I just think that whatever we can do, both in resources, code development, we can't forget them because they're just so full.
Let's get extremely practical. Speak to the audience. What are some encouragements from you of how we can just walk alongside those neighboring municipalities and really help in all the resources that us larger municipalities might have? How can we share that with our surrounding communities?
I'm a big fan like regional lunches. So first off, I'm sure you've heard the book, right? Never Eat Lunch Alone. And there are so many ways to learn from our peers just by saying, hey, do you have time for coffee? Can we schedule a lunch on our border of our jurisdiction? So learning from each other that way. So for me, when I was that young 19-year-old fire marshal, literally phoned the neighboring fire marshal and I said, I'm Mike, and I have no clue how to start this inspection. And he gave me his checklist, he gave me his forms, he started to teach me what codes and standards were, and he took a lot of time out. So I think all of us can start very locally in that aspect, but sometimes it starts with the ask. So the person who's new, the person who's learning, maybe the person who's feeling a bit small, sometimes just has to find some like-minded folks and get in the room and start asking questions. And food's a great way to do that. Start with lunch, go get coffee, have a conversation and see what happens.
I got to ask this question to John Terry, who, as you know, is a longtime moderator. And so I'm interested to hear your take from the other side of the table. What advice would you give to people new to the process altogether who want to get involved, want to make that first submittal for a code change? What advice would you give them?
You just got to do it. The answer is always no if you don't do it. So to me, pick your path. If you're more of a, I don't want to find friends right now, then just log into CDP Access, navigate it, and submit your code change. Make a great argument. If you're more of a, hey, I want to dip my toe in this, start local, start
Yeah.
with your state, start with others, get some friends, and just say, listen, can you guys help me work this? But if you really want to get it across the finish line, ask who else needs to be included in the room. In the case in point, we put lightweight brush protection in the residential code back somewhere around 2009, 12-ish. It went down early on because there was no work with opposing views. And in that case, understanding who could be some of that opposing view and getting their viewpoint to see if there's an area or opportunity to have some give and take. That's what's always going to seal the deal. And what I have found is if you can start asking those people who might be against it to start working on it, it's unbelievable what happens.
What have I not covered that you think is important for folks to know as far as code hearings and everything coming up?
I think if I'm a municipal official, let's say I'm an inspector, I'm a code official, and I'm not sure sometimes how to navigate this in your system, go have this conversation with your boss and say, I'm feeling drawn. I would like to go see what this is about. Because I think that's a great opportunity to start. Because sometimes this budget issue of budgeting these dollars, it's a factor for your involvement in the process. Remember that it's going to make you better at your job when you're in the room to hear the gray matter. And it's truly the gray words you're going to hear. I think for most of us, when we start in codes and standards development specifically, or just administering codes, the codes are black and white. And it is very easy for a code official to hide or just go behind a badge. And I also realize the term code official, building code official, fire code official is a extremely heavy weight. I have seen the burden of not missing something in all of those fields weigh on a code official. Getting involved in code development gives you such an opportunity to understand how the requirements are made and where there could be latitude. That's one of the things that I love with the new premium ICC codes. If I am in the 2024 code, and you might say, Mike, I'm not in the 2024. We like take Michigan. We're on the 2015 building code. And I was doing a building plan review this morning in which I know we've identified the topic in the 2021 and 2024, and it's not in the 2015 building code. So as a user, I knew the code is done and it's ready to go. And I was able to help get this shuttled across, knowing that the ICC in our membership has already addressed this issue. Why wouldn't we use those codes for feeling lost? So I think that's one aspect. But the beautiful thing about ICC Premium, when you are in that first edition, when that code requirement comes in, or any of them, if there was a code change on it, you can click on the videos.
Mhm.
And now I can start to feel the intent. For years, all we had was, hey, I see this code change. I'm getting pushback by the design professional. I don't understand it. It was go to the handbooks, right? Go to the commentary, read it, and try to consume it. Now, man, you are in any of our updated changes, any of our updated standards, now you can click on it. And so I love that aspect because you can now see and hear how we got to that code change. And nothing's going to equip you better to do your job than probably watching that 15, 20 minutes. Most code changes are done in 15 minutes or less. There's a whole bunch that take hours, but you can click on it. So if you're a paper, you're like, I'm a paper user. I'm just going to encourage you, you got to get online, you got to buy premium or get your organization to get you in premium because it'll make you a power user. You're just so much more equipped to navigate the challenges in your community.
I couldn't agree more. Michael, thanks for joining us, man. This was awesome. You know, our next guest is Jeffrey Shapiro. And in our last episode, I told you Jeffrey was the driving force behind the addition of residential sprinklers to the code. And I want to start there. So you told us you've been doing this for 50 years. When did the sprinkler issue come up for you?
In 2001, when I was working as a consultant to the multifamily housing industry, the multifamily housing industry agreed to go along with a change that required all residential occupancies other than 1 and 2 family dwellings to have fire sprinklers. So in the 2003 edition of the International Building Code, a change was made that every occupancy built under the scope of the IBC required fire sprinklers to be installed if it's an occupancy where you put your head down to go to sleep. So that was hotels, motels, apartments. Was pretty controversial actually at the time, particularly the motel industry opposed that. I can look at the news on a pretty regular basis and see apartment buildings that were built in the past 20 years that might not have been sprinklered under older codes that are sprinklered as a result of the changes that we made. And almost invariably, the fire sprinkler put the fire out. One or two people were saved.
Yeah.
In many cases, it's a non-event, and that's ideally what you want. A success is a non-event.
That's huge. And do you know offhand when the IRC began requiring them?
So that was also the second part of my signature issue. I was involved in a change that resulted in an appendix, Appendix P, being added to the International Residential Code to allow jurisdictions to adopt that appendix and require residential sprinklers. I did that on my own at the time. I didn't have any client interest, but it was someone else's code change. Tony Affelbeck, who is still building official and fire marshal in Altamont Springs, Florida, had a code change proposal in to add that appendix and called me on my way back from dinner and said, "Hey, Jeff, old buddy, can you do me a solid and testify on my proposal?" Long story short, I won't go into how that all played out, but there were some strategy issues involved in how that was dealt with. And it ended up being adopted at the final meeting of the co-development process for 1997. So anyway, as the process goes, the last hearing at the time was the membership meeting, and it was the last vote. So after that, nothing can change. And at the last vote of that process, the members voted to support adding that appendix to the code, and the builders didn't have any recourse. They were opposing it, but they lost. There was no recourse after that part of the process. But back to your question, what will I remember as the most meaningful aspect of my career in fire protection and code development? And it's absolutely the advocacy work that I've done to protect people in their homes and in multifamily occupancies where they live.
John Terry said, the beauty about the code adoption, and I'm paraphrasing, is regulation, not legislation. So have you seen instances where maybe that process has been more legislation than regulation?
Yeah, we're facing that today with one of the biggest issues that's hit code development in a long time, and it's a grassroots effort to undermine the code development process by going to legislatures to mandate in statute that code officials permit the construction of 4-story and taller buildings with a single exit for residential apartment use.
So are you still involved in the process? Will you be in Orlando?
I'm still involved in the process and will probably be for at least a little while longer. I will be in Orlando. I've not missed a code development hearing since 1982.
Wow.
No, I take that back. Sorry. 1988 was my first. So I've been to pretty much every ICBO and then ICC code development hearing since 1988.
What advice would you give someone who has never been involved in the process? As a longtime veteran, what would you say to encourage them?
Get involved. There's no price of admission. It's one thing to pick up a code book and read the words on the page. It's another thing entirely to understand the process by which those words get into the document. And when I used to teach code, one of the things I would explain to people is I'm not from an ivory tower. And I was involved in writing the code, but it's not done in an ivory tower. It's written by all of you out there who participate in the process. And people who have experience are the most valuable people to have in the code process. If you're a code enforcer, we want and we need people like that in this process so that the codes that we develop are well-founded and meet the needs of the people who are out in the trenches doing code enforcement. But show up. It's amazing how friendly and helpful people are in this process. There are lots of people like me who are excited to mentor people who come into the process. My greatest satisfaction in what I do today is not in the code development. It's mentoring people who are going to develop the codes in the future when I'm gone.
Is that what keeps you coming back?
It's a combination of things. I would say that's my greatest motivation. Off the record, my secondary motivation is I don't have any hobbies. Um,
Well, like many of us code geeks, this becomes our hobby.
This is an affliction, I call it, because I did this every day, all day. This was my life. It is my life. And honestly, I'm not working on 2 examples in the code process right now. I wrote a new chapter for animal boarding facilities. And minimum safety for animal boarding. There's nothing in the code that says if you take your cat or your dog to a pet boarding facility, that there's any safety requirement beyond just meeting the occupancy classification with regard to having the facility attended or any of the safety inspections. There's nothing. So we had a fire in Georgetown. I don't even know where Georgetown is. It's just north of Austin. There was a fire in Georgetown a few years ago at a pet resort where they had a building with 75 dogs locked in that building, unattended, and no fire protection. And those 75 pets perished. It wasn't really on my radar until I experienced that very personally in Georgetown, and I saw the news stories and I saw the pet owners and the devastation, and I thought something has to be done about it. Back to incremental progress. Several times there's been efforts in the code to adopt NFPA 150, which is very broadly on animal care for all kinds of facilities, from places where cows are milked and barns and racehorse stables. And we can't get that adopted in the code. It's too broad. But who's going to argue against safety for your dogs and cats? So I wrote a chapter that was limited in scope and put a minimum number of pets before the requirements were triggered, because politically, to get it adopted, you've got to have some reasonable, in quotes, threshold. So I wrote that chapter and I advocated that personally and on behalf of Lake Travis Fire. Nobody would have paid for that. And after that fire occurred, 3 people who were advocates who lost their pets in that fire went to the state legislature and got a bill introduced that was intending to improve safety in those facilities. And do you know the legislature did exactly the opposite? They flipped that bill entirely, and it was based on input by, I was able to find out, the veterinary industry, of all people, to flip that bill and make it a mandatory disclosure bill. So now when you go in, you don't have to provide any fire safety in a pet boarding facility, but they're going to force you to sign a document that says you acknowledge that there's no sprinklers in this facility and that it's not occupied. Not only does that not advance safety by forcing people to sign that document, but it now gives the owner of the facility something that their attorney takes to court after the fire and says, well, you knowingly accepted the terms that this facility didn't have these features. It's your fault the animal died, not ours. You shouldn't have put it here if you were concerned about safety.
Wow.
So anyway, the state precluded additional state legislation that would change that. But in the way the law was written, they did not diminish the ability of health and safety codes to step in on that, which is why I went to the IFC. And the IFC can include that if the state doesn't carve it out, and we'll get some minimum safety requirements. So I did that pro bono, and I also wrote a appendix chapter on short-term rental safety, because there's absolutely no requirement for short-term rental safety in the building or fire or property maintenance code, which is nuts. We regulate hotels. Why would we not regulate arguably places that are less safe with some minimum level of safety? So I did that, and actually, even though Airbnb initially opposed it, when I came around and worked with them, they eventually supported it.
Wow.
Now, there are Airbnb hosts that oppose it,
Yeah.
but Airbnb National actually supported the change.
When are those two coming to light, the Airbnb and the animal
So
care?
the animal boarding chapter, sadly, there was a floor amendment made at the last hearing that I agreed to and shouldn't have. I did it too quickly. So I agreed to something that was way broader than what I should have. So I submitted a public comment on that. That's going to end up going to the hearing in April 26. The short-term rental thing, I didn't submit any public comments on it. I'm pretty confident that some of the aggrieved Airbnb hosts who expressed opposition will probably make a full court press to try to kill that, and probably did submit public comments. So that too probably will go to the final action hearing and the online vote. I had overwhelming support on the animal care thing, so I really feel like that will probably pass in final action. Likewise, I had overwhelming support for the short-term rental appendix, but when the membership gets involved, I don't know how that'll play out. That'll be more interesting to see
Yeah.
what kind of opposition they might bring to the final action hearing.
That's just an awesome example of how this works in a nutshell. See a problem, propose a solution to it, try and get everyone on board, and then let the process do its thing. Jeffrey, thanks for being here. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And since you're right down the road in Austin, you're definitely going to be hearing from me. Our next guest is another legend in code development. But before we hear from him, let's hear from today's sponsor, 4Leaf.
4Leaf, a proud sponsor of the International Code Council, is a multidiscipline firm providing services throughout the United States. As one of the industry's leading providers of building and fire, life safety, code enforcement, planning, disaster recovery programs, and inspector of record services for both complex commercial structures and CIP programs, their clients value their continuous flexibility, proactive communication, and unfailing dedication that results in projects that are both on time and on budget. Please visit 4leafinc.com for more information or email them at careers@4leafinc.com. That's 4leafinc.com. If you're looking to join a fast-growing, dynamic organization, look no further than 4Leaf. 4Leaf, building partnerships since 1999.
So I want to welcome back John Terry, and if you missed him from our first episode, John has an amazing history in code development. He's been going to hearings for 30 years, been moderating for 20, and has really seen it all. So John, as someone with tons of experience to someone with virtually no experience in this, I'm curious about what it's like when you're actually up there pitching your proposal. Have you seen some folks get up there with what very well could be the most obvious and best suggestion, but they get up there and they just botch the opening bit? I mean, how important is that?
Present company included.
Yeah.
Present company included. Sometimes you just can't see the forest through the trees. You've got what you think is a slam dunk. This is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And you get up there and I'm all confident, stand up and say, I stand on my supporting statement. And then the questions start coming. And it's, oh man, I didn't think of that. Sorry, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. So
great summary. No follow-up.
Present company included. It's happened to me. I have gone down in flames at these hearings. It's not personal. Some people get offended. They take it personal. People get upset when I cut them off in their testimony. My job is to make sure everybody follows the rules. I always tell people, everybody follows the rules. Nobody's going to get hurt. So just follow the rules, because I see my role as making sure everybody has the same opportunity to be heard. And we have followed the rules because I do not want the ICC have to deal with an appeal on a code change that I've moderated, because appeals are appeals in procedure, not technical, but procedure. So I make sure we follow the procedures of Robert's Rules of Order, monitored by Council Policy 28. So it's not personal. This is business.
I haven't thought about the appeal side of things. Do y'all keep track of that? How many appeals have been brought against ones you've moderated? Yeah.
No, I will tell you. Russ, who is the new senior VP for the ICC in Codes and Standards, he tracks just about everything, but I don't think he's tracked appeals. He tracks how many code changes each moderator has heard.
MLB with stats.
What's your hourly rate? And trust me, there's a lot of pride going on here. We go back and we have had it. Yeah, I did 14.3 an hour. How many did you do? Well, I had tough code changes. I did 3. So we don't track appeals, but I've been on several appeals committees, and it's not a place that I want the organization to have to go. It's a tough thing.
Let me throw a curveball at you. Last season, we talked about artificial intelligence. It's fascinating to think about, all the data that's available, all the tragedies in our history, and saying, okay, here's all the data we know of. Here's all the codes uploaded as well. What'd we miss? And entering that world is pretty wild to think about.
But the
like
problem
you said, I don't think we're anywhere near it, but
you point out data, okay? Tragedies, 9/11,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
You would have thought that if the committee that the ICC put together to come forward with code changes as a result of the 9/11 tragedies, you would think they should just sail right through, because we have data. This is why. Everybody's going to look at that data differently. You've got the code official side looking at it. You've got the developer side looking at it. You've got the product manufacturer looking at it. Case in point, we looked at the bond strength of the spray-on fireproofing on the steel, because that was one of the bad actors when the planes hit, because the fireproofing came off the steel. Lots and lots of debate about that bond strength. Code officials are like, yeah, no big deal, let's do it. Manufacturers, they don't make it. What you're trying to propose, it's not manufactured. So we thought it was a great idea as a code official standpoint. Manufacturer says, yeah, maybe a great idea, but nobody makes what you want, what you're going to require us to do, which means we can't build those buildings. So I think there's so much back and forth. There's so many different eyes and opinions that are looking at these subjects that I'm old school. I need that human interaction.
Yeah. Thanks for chasing that rabbit with me. Going back to crafting a proposal, I mean, any other big pointers that someone needs to hear if they're a first time here and they're trying to craft their first proposal? What would you say to encourage them?
Well, if it's your first time, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Really, if it's your first time coming before the committee, don't do what I did. My first time coming before the committee, I took a shot at some accessibility issues, and I had never been to a hearing before. And here I walk in, and I'm going to throw some names out for some of the old timers. I got Brian Black, Larry Perry, Soy Williams, all of I call them the Brat Pack. There was a group of people that were just actively involved in accessibility issues. And here I am fighting every single one of them. I'm like, this wasn't a very good idea. Now, was it? Holy crap. It was, my boss wanted me to do it. So I did what my boss told me to do. It pays the mortgage. But if someone is so inclined and they're looking at something going, I need to fix this. If it's your first time, make it a relatively simple code change. Not change for the sake of change, because I hate that. Change law to A. Don't wordsmith me. But if you've got something, just make sure it's, don't rewrite the height and area table as your first code change proposal.
Noted. I'll take that off my desk. So again, your time as a code official, particularly as a moderator, you got to have some favorite moments. What are some of the most memorable times that you can recall?
Oh, goodness. Quite honestly, I probably had more fun sitting in the seats than I did when I was up on the podium. Up on the podium, I'm 98% business. I can joke around a little bit, but I focus on the matter at hand. Sitting in the seats, there are so many crazy things that have happened. One of my favorite, it sounds stupid, but my buddy Ed Steiner, Eddie was a fire guy out of Oklahoma, Edmond, Oklahoma. And every time I got up to get a cup of coffee, or at the time I was smoking, go have a cigarette, Eddie would always say to me, hey, JT, could you give me a cup of coffee? So after about 2 or 3 days of this, I got all my friends and everybody that I was sitting around. I said, do me a favor. Every time you get up, get Eddie a cup of coffee. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this guy's got like 20 cups of coffee piled around him. I saw his wife the next day. She was so pissed off at me. She's like, why did you give my husband all that coffee? I said, he didn't have to drink it. She says, he's an Okie. He's a gentleman. Of course he's going to drink it. Somebody gives him something. And I'm like, oh man, it just silly crap like that. I mean, you got to sit through 10, 12 hours a day. You gotta have a little bit of fun. We work hard when we're on the podium. We have our fun after the hearings. We break bread together. We have a couple cocktails. We pick on each other unmercifully, but it's that connection. The only reason I still moderate, quite honestly, because I do not have any skin in the game anymore. The only reason I do this is because my friends moderate. And I get the opportunity to hang out with my buddies, with guys and gals. We get to hang out for 10 days, a couple times a year. My wife keeps saying to me, when are you going to stop this? You're too old for this crap. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still having fun. As long as my buddies are doing it, as long as my buddies are still involved and we're able to give the company 3-4 hours a day, no reason why I can't keep going.
Well, we certainly hope you do. I want to thank John and all our guests. And I have to tell you, folks, the amount of experience and wisdom we've heard on today's show is just unreal and makes me so proud to be a part of the profession where so many people not only care so deeply, but further are eager to share that information with others. If you want to learn more about the code development process, please visit iccsafe.org/code-development. And if you haven't done so yet, go back and listen to part 1 of this series on code development, which will essentially serve as a more how-to guide for you. In our next episode, we leave the world of code development and get to talk building science with a friend of mine down here in Texas. And I promise you're not going to want to miss what's next. But until then, remember, in these knowledge-driven conversations that we get to be a part of every single day, people don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. So let's be quick to listen, slow to speak, and I'll meet you back here next time on ICC's Pulse Podcast.